If tonight, humanity suddenly lost the need to sleep, the world would not collapse. Nothing would explode, no systems would fail, no alarms would sound, and that is precisely why it would be dangerous. Because the first thing people would feel is relief, not joy, not fear. Relief from exhaustion, relief from deadlines postponed by fatigue, relief from the biological command to stop. Sleep has always felt like friction, a delay, a waste of potential. So when it disappears, we don't question it, we celebrate. For the first several hours, the evidence seems to support our optimism. People remain focused, reaction times feel stable, conversation stays coherent. Work continues uninterrupted. This reinforces the belief that sleep was merely inefficiency built into the human body. But biology does not fail immediately, it fails cumulatively. Inside the brain, chemical processes do not care about cultural celebration. A molecule called adenosine continues to accumulate. Under normal conditions, adenosine binds to receptors and creates sleep pressure. It slows neural firing. It forces rest, not as punishment, as protection. Adenosine prevents neurons from overfiring. It limits cardiovascular stress. It acts as a brake when the system approaches unsafe limits. A sleepless world cannot tolerate this signal, so it must be suppressed pharmacologically, genetically, or technologically, and this is the first invisible trade-off. You do not remove fatigue, you remove feedback. Imagine driving a car where the temperature gauge has been disconnected. The engine still runs, the speed still increases, nothing feels wrong, until metal fatigue reaches a threshold, and thresholds, by definition, are crossed silently. As hours turn into days, the body does not protest, but cellular damage accelerates. Oxidative stress increases, inflammatory responses remain elevated, tissue repair never fully engages. In a sleeping organism, rest is when damage is corrected. In a sleepless one, damage is merely tolerated. This produces a new kind of aging, not gradual decline, but compressed decay. A person at 35 appears functional, productive, engaged. But biologically, their systems resemble someone decades older. No pain signals warn them, because the warning system was disabled first. Now, compress time further. 3 days pass. In a normal human, this would produce hallucinations. In this world, hallucinations do not occur. Not because the brain is healthier, but because consciousness never disengages. And consciousness without interruption is not clarity. It is accumulation. Every waking moment creates neural connections. Most of them are useless, passing thoughts, minor fears, transient emotional reactions. Sleep performs synaptic pruning. It removes weak connections, reduces noise, reorganizes memory into hierarchy. Sleep decides what matters. Without sleep, nothing is removed. The brain stops curating reality. Everything remains. Thoughts that should fade persist. Worries that should soften harden. Speculation lingers long enough to feel factual. The mind is not empty, it clogs. At first, people describe heightened awareness. They say they feel sharper, more alert, more alive. But this is a misinterpretation. The brain is not processing more truth, it is generating more hypotheses. This produces a subtle psychological shift. The brain begins to treat every signal as potentially important. Threat ranking degrades, noise competes with meaning. Decision-making slows, not from confusion, but from overload. This is how paranoia emerges, not delusion, not madness. Paranoia is simply the inability to dismiss low-probability threats. In a sleepless world, this becomes widespread, not fear. Hypervigilance. People don't lose touch with reality. They lose hierarchy within it. They know many things, but cannot tell which ones deserve action. Now consider empathy. Empathy is not moral. It is neurological. It requires reading micro-expressions, tone shifts, contextual nuance. These processes consume cognitive resources. Sleep deprivation reduces activity in regions responsible for emotional decoding. Without rest, the brain reallocates resources inward, not because it becomes selfish, but because it becomes overloaded. Cruelty increases, not from hatred, from inattention. People stop noticing each other. Relationships do not collapse dramatically, they decay quietly. Conversation becomes transactional. Listening feels effortful. Patience evaporates. Conflict is not the primary cause of separation. Misalignment is now return to creativity. Initially, output explodes. More time means more production. But production is not creativity. Creativity requires delay, unresolved tension, unconscious recombination, mental silence. Sleep provides that silence. Without it, the brain demands closure. Immediately, every idea must become something now. A post, a product, a reaction. Nothing ferments, nothing matures. Culture does not go silent. It becomes noisy, fast, repetitive, shallow. Not because humans lack imagination, but because they lose the ability to discard bad ideas. A sleepless civilization does not suffer from scarcity of thought, it drowns in unfiltered cognition. Now zoom out. The planet absorbs the cost. The words never sleeps, never enters low-demand cycles. Energy grids operate at peak load indefinitely. Data centers run without hours. Logistics never pause. Efficiency drops. Waste increases. Environmental systems are not designed for constant pressure. They recover through fluctuation. Remove fluctuation, and stress accumulates linearly, until collapse becomes non-linear. The first generation celebrates freedom. The second inherits accelerated decay. By the third, the question is no longer, why don't we sleep? It becomes, how do we slow down something that was never designed to stop? And that is the illusion. Sleep was never the enemy of progress. It was the governor, the final limit preventing human systems from running themselves into extinction. Once sleep disappears, the human mind becomes the primary bottleneck. The body can be forced to endure. Systems can be optimized. Schedules can be extended. But cognition does not scale linearly. It accumulates cost. The human brain evolved under a strict rhythm. Wake, act, stop, reset. Sleep was never optional. It was the structural pause that allowed meaning to remain stable. Remove that pause, and cognition enters a state of permanent load. At first, people feel sharper. They describe increased focus, faster reaction times, a sense of heightened awareness. This stage is deceptive because clarity and stimulation feel similar in the short term. The brain, deprived of sleep, compensates by increasing alertness signals. Stress hormones remain elevated. Attention systems stay engaged. The result feels like productivity, but it is closer to constant emergency mode. The problem is not that the brain becomes weak, it becomes indiscriminate. Every conscious moment requires the brain to predict what matters, what can be ignored, what is dangerous, what is noise. Sleep recalibrates these predictions. It lowers confidence in irrelevant models. It weakens false associations. Without sleep, prediction errors compound. Imagine a navigation system that never updates its map. Each wrong turn adds another incorrect assumption. Eventually, the system is not lost because it lacks information. It is lost because it has too much incorrect certainty. This is how cognitive overload manifests, not as confusion, as misplaced confidence. In a sleepless world, people do not feel uncertain. They feel certain too often. Every thought feels plausible. Every interpretation feels justified. Every reaction feels necessary. This erodes decision-making, not because options disappear, but because prioritization collapses. When everything feels urgent, nothing is truly important. This is why prolonged wakefulness produces paranoia-like symptoms. Not hallucinations, not delusions, but hypersignificance. The brain assigns meaning where none exists. Patterns appear everywhere. Intent is inferred constantly. In a sleepless civilization, this state becomes normalized. People are not anxious, they are vigilant, constantly scanning, constantly interpreting, constantly reacting. Now consider what this does to social trust. Trust requires cognitive slack. The ability to tolerate ambiguity, to delay judgment, to assume benign intent. These processes are expensive. They are the first to be sacrificed under load. Without sleep, the brain reallocates resources inward. Self-monitoring increases. External sensitivity decreases. Not because people become selfish, because the system is overloaded. Empathy is not a moral choice. It is a bandwidth-intensive computation. It requires decoding micro-expressions, tone shifts, and context simultaneously. Sleep deprivation reduces activity in neural networks responsible for emotional inference. Without recovery, these networks degrade. The result is subtle. People still understand language, they still recognize faces, but they misread emotional intent. Sarcasm feels hostile, neutrality feels cold, silence feels threatening. This produces friction everywhere, not explosive conflict, persistent misunderstanding. Relationships do not end because of arguments, they end because emotional synchronization fails. Responses arrive too fast or too slow. Signals are misinterpreted. Repair attempts are skipped. Conversation becomes transactional. Listening feels effortful. Patience feels wasteful. Not because people stop caring, because caring requires resources they no longer have. Now examine creativity again, more precisely. Creativity is not idea generation, it is idea selection. The ability to discard 90% of mental output in favor of one coherent direction. Sleep enables this selection. It weakens trivial associations, it strengthens meaningful ones. Without sleep, the brain stops filtering. Ideas arrive constantly, but none are tested in silence. Everything must be externalized immediately. This shifts culture fundamentally. Creation accelerates, reflection disappears. Thought becomes performance. In a sleepless world, nothing waits. Opinions are published before they stabilize. Art is released before it matures. Reactions precede understanding. Depth requires delay. Delay requires tolerance for unresolved tension. Sleep provides that tolerance. Without it, closure becomes compulsive. This is how originality collapses without vanishing. Volume increases, insight declines, culture becomes saturated but hollow. Now zoom out again. Consider information systems. A sleepless population produces continuous data. Messages never stop. News cycles never pause. Markets never close. There is no longer a reset point. Previously, sleep created synchronization. People disengaged simultaneously. Systems entered low activity states, meaning stabilized. Without sleep, desynchronization becomes the norm. Attention fragments across time zone schedules and cycles. No shared pause exists. This creates an illusion of constant relevance. Everything feels current, everything feels urgent, nothing settles. In such an environment, complexity becomes intolerable. People seek simplification. Rules, guidelines, automated judgment. Algorithms thrive under these conditions. They do not fatigue. They do not require recalibration through rest. They provide certainty when the human mind cannot. Over time, decision-making migrates outward, from human judgment to automated systems, not because machines are wiser, because they are stable. The sleepless mind craves stability, even if it sacrifices autonomy to get it. This is where power quietly shifts, not through force, through convenience. Systems that reduce cognitive load gain authority. Recommendation engines, behavioral scoring, predictive governance. Choice narrows, not because it is forbidden, because navigating complexity becomes unbearable. Freedom does not disappear, it becomes exhausting. At the individual level, people feel functional. At the systemic level, agency erodes. And the most dangerous part is this: no one feels oppressed, they feel efficient. A sleepless society does not collapse into chaos. It organizes itself into rigid patterns, patterns designed to reduce mental effort. This is the paradox. Removing sleep increases available time, but reduces cognitive resilience. The mind becomes faster, but narrower, more reactive, less reflective. Eventually, the question is no longer how much can we do? It becomes how much complexity can we tolerate before we surrender control? And the answer is less than we think. Once sleep disappears, the economy does not transform overnight. It drifts, slowly at first, quietly, almost politely, which is why most people fail to notice what is actually happening. The dominant assumption is intuitive. If humans no longer sleep, productivity increases. If productivity increases, prosperity follows. This logic feels obvious, and it is wrong. Economies do not respond to intuition. They respond to scarcity. Before the disappearance of sleep, time was finite. Every human had roughly 16 usable waking hours per day. 8 of those were typically sold to survive. Time was constrained, which gave it value. Remove sleep, and that constraint vanishes. Every individual gains 8 additional waking hours, not occasionally, every day. across the entire population. This does not double productivity, it floods the market with labor. Billions of additional labor hours appear instantly. But demand for labor does not scale infinitely. There are only so many jobs, so many tasks, so many roles that create value. When supply overwhelms demand, prices do not crash dramatically. They erode, wages stagnate, raises disappear, benefits shrink. At first, nothing feels broken. People respond rationally. They work more hours to compensate. 16 hours becomes normal. 18 hours becomes admirable. 20 hours becomes competitive. This is where the illusion deepens. People believe they are choosing to work more. In reality, the baseline has shifted. This phenomenon can be described with brutal simplicity. Time inflation. When everyone has more time, time itself becomes cheaper. Previously, selling 8 hours of your day could secure a living. Now, 8 hours is insufficient. Not because life became more expensive, but because your leverage disappeared. This is not exploitation in the traditional sense. No one forces you. The market simply recalibrates around abundance. Employers do not reward endurance. They reward replaceability. And in a sleepless world, replaceability increases. You are not competing against who is most skilled. You are competing against who can last longest. This marks a fundamental shift from an economy of skill to an economy of stamina. At first glance, this seems fair. Everyone has the same 24 hours. Everyone has the same opportunity. But equality of hours does not produce equality of outcomes, because not all humans endure equally. Biology still matters. Genetics matter. Health matters. Age matters. Those who can tolerate prolonged stress gain advantage. Those who cannot fall behind. This creates the first fracture. A class of high-endurance workers emerges, not more intelligent, not more creative, simply more resilient to damage. They are praised. They are promoted. They are held up as proof that the system works. Everyone else internalizes failure. But endurance has limits, and those limits are unevenly distributed. This is where capital enters the picture. Machines never slept. Algorithms never rested. Automated systems already operate 24 hours a day. The removal of sleep does not give humans an advantage over machines. It exposes how much they were already losing. Capital scales perfectly with sleeplessness. Labor does not. As human workers extend their hours, machines extend nothing. They were already optimized. The gap widens. Those who own systems extract value continuously. Those who sell time extract value conditionally. This creates a new class divide, not based on wealth alone, but on biological expendability. One class sells endurance, the other sells leverage. The endurance class works longer just to remain solvent. Their bodies degrade faster, their cognitive performance declines, their replacement risk increases. The leverage class does not work more. They reorganize systems. They automate decision-making. They extract value from scale. This is not a conspiracy. It is efficiency. In a sleepless economy, rest becomes irrational. If you can work, why wouldn't you? If others are working 20 hours, why would you stop at 16? Rest transforms from a biological necessity into a personal liability. This is where pressure replaces coercion. No one needs to force compliance. The market disciplines behavior automatically. Eventually, refusal to overwork is reframed, not as a right, as irresponsibility. The language shifts. Committed, driven, available. These become moral descriptors. And once morality enters economics, guilt follows. People feel lazy for resting, ashamed for slowing down, anxious during inactivity. This anxiety fuels consumption, stimulants, focus enhancers, mood stabilizers, anything that allows the body to keep pace with expectations. A secondary market emerges, not for sleep, for suppression of its absence. Pharmaceutical endurance becomes normalized, not to exceed limits, to survive them. Meanwhile, wages continue to compress, hours increase, security declines. This produces a quiet transformation. Life becomes a continuous negotiation with exhaustion that never manifests as sleepiness, only as deterioration. The most dangerous consequence emerges slowly. People no longer measure success by progress. They measure it by survival. Ambition narrows, risk-taking declines, long-term planning erodes. Why plan decades ahead when your body feels decades older at 40? This reshapes society's priorities. Innovation slows. Maintenance dominates. People do not dream of changing the system. They dream of enduring it. At the top, the sleepless economy appears miraculous. GDP rises, markets remain active around the clock. Capital flows without interruption. At the bottom, time becomes a trap. The more you sell, the less it's worth. This is the final paradox of sleeplessness. Removing sleep increases available hours, but reduces meaningful freedom. Freedom requires the ability to refuse. Refusal requires leverage. Leverage requires scarcity. A world without sleep destroys scarcity of time, and with it the power to say no. Eventually, the question shifts. Not how much can we produce, but how much damage can humans absorb before they become obsolete? Because once endurance defines value, machines win. The sleepless economy does not collapse, it stabilizes. Around systems that do not age, humans become the inefficient component. And when inefficiency becomes visible, replacement follows. This is not the end of work, it is the end of labor as bargaining power. The sleepless world does not enslave humanity, it renders humanity optional. Once sleep disappears, society does not immediately become chaotic. It becomes misaligned, quietly, systematically. For most of human history, sleep synchronized civilization. People disengaged at similar times. Night created a shared pause. Families gathered. Cities slowed. Conflict cooled. Sleep was not just biological, it was social glue. In a sleepless world, that glue dissolves. There's no longer a common off switch. No universal end of day. Time fractures. At first, this seems like flexibility. People choose different schedules. Work adapts to individual rhythms. But flexibility without synchronization produces drift. Consider a household. One partner works during the night, the other during the day. Both are awake, both are productive, but they no longer overlap. Meals disappear. Conversation becomes logistical. Emotional repair is postponed indefinitely. Children adapt first. They attend school in staggered shifts, interact with rotating peer groups. No stable rhythm emerges. Family stops being a unit of shared time. It becomes a network of asynchronous individuals. Conflict does not escalate. It decays. There's no moment where everyone is present long enough to confront it. Relationships end not with arguments, but with silence. This desynchronization spreads outward. Communities lose cohesion. Neighborhoods never rest simultaneously. Public spaces never belong to anyone collectively. Previously, nighttime created vulnerability, and vulnerability created trust. You knew when others were disengaged. You knew when systems slowed. In a sleepless world, vigilance never ends. There is no safe hour. There is no assumed downtime. This fundamentally alters social psychology. People stop assuming benign absence. Silence no longer means rest. It means unknown activity. Trust erodes. Not because people become malicious, but because predictability vanishes. Social rituals weaken. Holidays lose meaning. Celebrations fragment. There is no shared pause to mark significance. Time no longer feels cyclical. It feels flat, endless. Without cycles, memory loses structure. Events blur. Life feels continuous but shallow. Now consider crime. A world without sleep does not eliminate darkness. It eliminates expectation. Criminal activity no longer clusters around night. It diffuses. At any moment, someone is awake. At any moment, someone is exposed. This increases pressure on security systems. Surveillance expands, not out of authoritarian impulse. Out of necessity, human monitoring cannot operate indefinitely, so it is automated. Cameras, pattern recognition, behavioral prediction. Safety becomes probabilistic. Algorithms flag anomalies. Intervention becomes preemptive. People are not punished for crimes. They are managed for risk. This feels efficient. It is also irreversible. Once society adapts to constant vigilance, stepping back feels dangerous. People accept monitoring not because they are coerced, but because uncertainty is exhausting. Desynchronization creates anxiety. Surveillance promises relief. Social life becomes regulated by systems that never sleep, and slowly, humans adapt their behavior accordingly. Spontaneity declines. Deviation feels risky. Predictability becomes safety. This is not oppression, it is optimization. Meanwhile, isolation deepens, not physical isolation, temporal isolation. Temporal isolation. People are surrounded by others who are awake, but rarely awake together. Loneliness increases despite constant interaction, because connection requires simultaneity. Digital spaces fill the gap. They operate continuously. They simulate presence, but they do not replace shared time. Identity fragments. People present different versions of themselves across schedules. There is no unified social self. This produces subtle alienation, not dramatic despair. Persistent detachment. People feel functional, but disconnected. At scale, this reshapes society. Movements lose momentum. Collective action weakens. Protests fail to synchronize. Coordination becomes expensive. Fragmentation becomes default. Power consolidates not through force, but through temporal dominance. Institutions that control timing control behavior. Platforms, markets, infrastructure. When people are never offline together, they are never fully together. This is the social cost of sleeplessness. Not collapse, disintegration. The world keeps running, but no longer breathes. By the time humanity fully adapts to a world without sleep, nothing feels broken. That is the most unsettling part. There is no single moment of collapse. No dramatic failure. No obvious villain. The system works. Cities function continuously. Markets remain open. Information flows without interruption. People are awake, productive, available. And yet, something essential has quietly vanished: the ability to disengage. Sleep was the last universal refusal, a biological shutdown that no system could override. It did not ask permission. It did not negotiate. It simply arrived. Every day, for everyone. In removing sleep, humanity removed the final boundary it did not choose. And once all boundaries become optional, power rushes in to define new ones. In a sleepless world, surveillance does not emerge as tyranny. It emerges as infrastructure. When activity never stops, oversight cannot pause. When risk exists at every hour, monitoring becomes continuous. Not because authorities demand it, because society expects it. Surveillance systems promise relief. They reduce uncertainty. They offload vigilance. They simplify complexity. People accept them willingly, not because they fear control, but because they are exhausted by choice. When nothing rests, decision-making never resets. Fatigue becomes permanent, and permanent fatigue seeks automation. Algorithms do not sleep. They do not drift emotionally. They do not need reflection. They provide consistent output. In a sleepless world, consistency feels like wisdom. Gradually, judgment migrates. From human deliberation to automated recommendation. From collective debate to predictive modeling. This is not the rise of authoritarianism. It is the outsourcing of agency. People do not lose freedom, they trade it for predictability. And once systems assume responsibility for safety, they also assume authority. Behavior is not punished, it is nudged. Risk is not forbidden. It is priced. Deviation becomes inefficient. Conformity becomes comfortable. No one forces compliance. The environment rewards it. This is the final evolution of control, not coercion, optimization. Now step back. Observe the species as a whole. A humanity without sleep does not become superhuman. It becomes optimized, efficient, predictable, stable, but also narrow. The traits that once defined humanity did not thrive under constant wakefulness. They required interruption. Imagine needed boredom. Empathy needed rest. Wisdom needed distance. Sleep created distance from stimulus, from urgency, from reaction. It allowed thought to cool, meaning to settle, identity to stabilize. Without sleep, life becomes continuous response. One moment flows into the next without punctuation. And without punctuation, stories lose structure. So do lives. People still live. They still work. They still connect. But they no longer step outside the system long enough to question it. Critique requires pause. Rebellion requires rest. Change requires distance. A sleepless civilization cannot look away. And what cannot look away cannot imagine alternatives. This is the final paradox. Removing sleep gives humanity more time, but takes away the only state in which time could be reflected upon. progress accelerates, direction disappears. The world does not end in fire or silence. It stabilizes into something efficient, something resilient, something inhuman, and that is when the question finally changes. Not, what if humans no longer needed sleep, but what was sleep protecting us from? The answer is not weakness, it is permanence. Sleep was the reset that prevented systems from becoming absolute, the pause that allowed humanity to remain unfinished. Without it, the world does not collapse. It completes itself, and in doing so, leaves no room for anything else.